Hi, I'm Stuart Molina, and welcome back to Conversations with the Maestro. This month we have our principal trumpet, Phil Snedecor. It's a fantastic interview. I think you're in for a treat. It's been quite a month. We're very much looking forward to getting back on stage in February, but I'll talk about that after the interview. For right now, let's head to see Phil. Hey, Phil, how are you doing?
Good. How are you, Stuart?
I'm good. Thanks so much for joining me today. I'm looking forward to this conversation a lot.
Wish I were there in person.
Oh, well, hopefully sooner than later. We always start by talking about how you came to your instrument, in your case, obviously the trumpet. Where'd you grow up? How did you come to the trumpet? A little bit about your family, maybe, and the early years of being Phil Snedecor.
Well, I was born in Poughkeepsie, New York, but we quickly moved to California and then Phoenix, Arizona, where I went to Kachina Elementary School. Have you heard this story?
I have not. I was thinking, like, why did you move so much? Was
my dad worked for IBM. So he was a computer guy, and we moved around. And I ended up at Kachina Elementary School right near Camelback Mountain in Phoenix. And I went to this elementary school that also had the middle school and the high school kind of all in the same complex. And so the high schoolers came and they did a talent show. And I was in, third grade. And they got on stage and they went, and I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to play the drums.
Of course.
And I went home and I told my mother I wanted to play the drums. She goes, no way. So I said, okay, I'll play the trumpet, because the trumpet was the second coolest guy on stage. So that's my story. I wanted to play because of the theme to Hawaii Five-0.
Well, listen, whatever brings you to music, I think that's fantastic. I'm just kind of staggered that you knew as early as third grade that, did you know that this was what you wanted to do, or this was just what you wanted to play like in school band?
That's just what I wanted to play in school band. I had no idea. But I thought that was very cool. And so then a couple of years later, when I moved to Dallas and they asked me what instrument I wanted to play in fifth grade, I already knew that I was going to get the drums vetoed, so I picked the trumpet. Mm-hmm. So there you go.
Well, that's cool. And so how long, who did you study with when you were younger? And how long was it before you actually did know that this was something that you really were seriously interested in doing for a long time?
So I started studying with a guy named John Nelson, who was in the Fort Worth Symphony. And he was local player and teacher around town. And he was just a beautiful player. He'd gone to Juilliard, but he never got a big orchestra job. He just, did a lot of jobs around the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And he used to teach me out of this Schubert book. It was Schubert's songs. And he would play these songs and I would play them back to him. And so that's how I got my musical sense. Of phrasing is he would just play and I would play back. And we had the music there and everything, but it also developed my ears because he didn't really want me to. And he also never told me anything was hard. Like he would play really hard, high stuff, and I would just play it back to him. So that was cool, too. So John Nelson died about 10 years ago of a heart attack, but really fabulous musician and beautiful player, and really instilled in me a sense of phrasing and music that I've carried with me forever. And then, I studied with Don Jacoby, who used to be with Les Brown's big band, and then later at Eastman, I studied with Barbara Butler and Charlie Geyer and Arnold Jacobs in Chicago when I was there. And so I have a long list of great teachers. So I always tell people if I'm not doing something right, it's my fault because I've had the greatest teachers.
Well, when I think about your playing in particular, I think of you as a very lyrical player. Do you think that this comes from this early introduction to lyricism in music? I mean, a lot of kids start in school and they're playing in school band, and that's kind of how they start on the trumpet. And it's just play as loud as you can and all of that. But Schubert obviously is a completely different feeling of music. I mean, did that stick with you in the long term? I mean, I think it's such a cool way to start out teaching.
I was playing Die Schöne Müllerin when I was in fifth grade. I mean, wow. I didn't know what it was, or the Earl King, I had no idea, but this was great music that was being presented to me, and I just thought it was cool. So yes, I didn't start with twinkles. I started with really cool stuff. So absolutely, I attributed to that.
That's totally awesome. And so you get through high school and you've decided that this is what you want to do. You've had great teaching so far. Where did you do your college training and after?
So it was the Eastman School, and I really didn't know that I was on my way when I auditioned for 5 schools, and of course one of them was Juilliard because everybody said you have to try Juilliard, and it's Indiana and Northwestern and Illinois and Eastman and Juilliard, and my dad took me on this really cool tour of all these schools auditioning, and one of my greatest memories of my dad was touring these schools, and we were in New York City. It was the day before my Juilliard audition. And I said, Dad, I can't go out and just party tonight. I've got to go practice. And so he gets on the phone and he starts calling these rehearsal studios. And he rents an entire dance studio for me to rehearse in because that's what he did.
That's awesome.
Oh, that was cool. So anyway, I was very successful in the other auditions. I got in most places, and I decided to go to Eastman because I really liked the vibe there. I had no idea that I was on my way to study with the greatest trumpet teachers really in the world, and they weren't. They didn't have that reputation yet. They actually were relatively unknown. Barbara Butler was the former principal of Vancouver, and Charlie Geyer was former Chicago Symphony and Houston, and they came together. They were married, and they wanted a job together, so they quit their playing jobs and started teaching at Eastman, and they taught a bunch of world-class, really great studios that went on to, do great things. But now they're at Rice University, and now these days, if you were one of the anointed 6 trumpet players that get to study with them, you go to Rice University and study with Barbara Butler or Charlie Geyer. And so I had no idea I was walking into the middle of early in their career.
That's really fantastic. And did you like the vibe when you actually got there? Did it play out well? I mean, beyond having wonderful teaching, how did you like being in Rochester at Eastman and part of this big university?
Eastman was everything I thought it should be as a music school. I had great other students. I had great teachers. I had great productions. I was on the Wynton Marsalis Carnival CD.
Wow.
When he did all those cornet solos. That was me playing first trumpet. I had world-class experiences there. It was amazing.
Oh, I had no idea about that. That's really cool. And so now you've gotten through school and you graduate. And so where does that leave you as a trumpeter? I assume that every year there are many trumpeters that come out of these schools. What does one do to break into the profession?
Yeah, so I always tell my students you have to go make your own rain. The only gig you own is the gig you own, and you can't just wait around for the phone to ring. And so I didn't. I started calling people that I knew and blah, blah, blah. And pretty soon I found myself on a trial basis with the Dallas Brass. Mike Levine was the director of that. He was the trombone player and also did speaking. And this is where I learned how to speak in front of an audience because he would give these introductions, these tunes that were so riveting that by the time you played the tune, the audience was really ready to hear this music. They got so excited about to listen to the music of Leonard Bernstein or Copland or Owazen or whoever you're playing that they really got into it emotionally. And so when later on in the story, I started speaking before tunes and it really worked out well for me. And I learned how to do that through Mike Levine. Anyway, I played with Rudd was the other trumpet player.
Love Whiff.
Yeah, a lot of great. Alex Schuhan was the horn player. Gary Carper was the tuba player. Great group, and I learned a lot. But I had some holes in my playing that I needed to fix. I could tell that it was not my playing wasn't where I needed to be. So I knew the next stop for me was to go study with Arnold Jacobs in Chicago. And so I kind of set my sights on that. And I literally one day just packed up everything I owned in a car and moved to Chicago. And so the story was that I knew I wanted to study with Jacobs, but I didn't really have his phone number. So I went and stayed with a friend and showed up at Ravinia 3 weeks in a row. And finally, on the 3rd week.
Wow, that's amazing. And so you moved again and you were in the professional world at actually a very high level and then decided to go back to school. And how long were you at graduate school?
Well, I actually didn't go back to graduate school. I moved to Chicago and just studied with Jacobs.
Oh, fantastic.
And started taking auditions and ended up in assistant principal in Elgin Symphony and Northwest Indiana and Millar Brass Ensemble.
Wow, that's fantastic. Yeah, actually, it's interesting. When I look at Chicago, that whole area around Chicago reminds me a lot about the area here, where you have all of these smaller regional orchestras that have such a rich pool of great players to play. Did you enjoy the itinerant life of freelancing right away?
Yeah, I thought it was great. I mean, there was so much to do in the Chicago area, and it was really high level of freelancer and player, and I was in it. But I always tell people you can be successful, but you might not still be making rent. And so I wasn't making rent, and so my day job was working at Schilke's trumpet factory, and I was making trumpets, and I was more specifically finishing piccolo trumpet valves. And so I would hone the valves and make it for the casing, and that was my from 7:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. That's what I did for 8 months. And so I tell people, if you have a Schilke piccolo trumpet with really crummy valves, that's me.
So,
'Cause I
so
was
thank goodness you left that world very quickly. The trumpet world thanks you for that decision. So Phil, in addition to being a great trumpet player, is a terrific composer, arranger. We'll talk about all of these things later, but I thought it would be nice to start with a piece that Phil himself wrote. So do you want to introduce it?
Right. So this is called Long New England Winter, and this is part of a collection I put together called The Music of New England Then and Now. And it actually starts with music of the Mohegan Indians, Native Americans, and goes on through time to, of course, Charles Ives and people that were composers that were active in Connecticut. And then the second to last piece is this one, and then the very last piece is a piece by my student, Brandon Dix. So this is the second to last piece in this big collection for trumpet and piano. And this piece was based on Prokofiev themes, and it just kind of reminded me of winter in New England. It was my fourth year here, and I love it in New England. I had been in the Washington D.C. area for 25 years, and I came up here, and it was cool. So I wrote it based on the landscapes and the kind of the feeling I get up here, and it's a really cool piece, I think.
Well, wonderful. Let's hear it. Well, that was really beautiful. I actually I love all the pieces that you've written that I've heard, and I find it interesting the different impacts that various composers have on your writing. You said this one was based on Prokofiev, and I certainly can hear that. But I always hear an underpinning as well of Aaron Copland, the other, mid 20th century American composers, and always, I don't know, there's some kind of jazzy stuff in there too. How would you describe the influences on your own compositions?
Well, somebody asked me where I learned how to compose, and I actually never took a composition course. I mean, I just kept my ears open, and unless you're writing serial music, which is 12-tone music, you're gonna
God forbid.
you're probably going to repeat something that you've heard in some way. And that's a good thing because I think audiences really value familiarity. And if you are hearing things that are familiar, but maybe in a little different way, it piques your attention. It's like smelling something you've smelled before. It ignites an emotion in you that's pleasant or not, but at least it does something to pique your interest. It's interesting, right? And so if you've heard something in a similar way or in a simpler vein than what you just heard, and it brings back a memory, that's great. That's what I want.
I actually love the way you just described that. That makes a lot of sense. And I'm thinking about like meals. You can create a brand new dish, but unless it has familiar aromas, familiar flavors, it's going to be a meaningless experience. So
the last thing you want is for somebody to serve you something and you smell it and go, what the hell is that?
There you go.
You want to smell it and go, I smelled something like that. That smells great.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the trumpet itself. It's an instrument that probably is one of the more familiar instruments of the orchestra for an audience. They've seen trumpeters playing their entire lives. What are the quirks of the trumpet, and what are some things that people might not know about the trumpet?
Well, there's a famous quote about, men die in battle to the sound of the trumpet, right? I mean, it's a heroic instrument. And so it started off that way. I mean, King Tut was literally buried with trumpets. Like, if you go to the King Tut exhibit, you will see the trumpets that he was buried with. I think he might have actually been buried with his trumpet players, but we won't go there. But so thankfully, I wasn't one of King Tut's trumpet players. But it's a very ancient instrument. It's one of the oldest instruments. People have been buzzing their lips into instruments for thousands of years, starting with the conch shell, and then I actually write pieces for the conch shell. That's a whole other discussion. But buzzing your lips into something and making a sound is a very ancient thing. And so the trumpet is probably one of the more modern expressions of that, but it's a very old instrument.
Yeah. And what would you say, are there a lot of different kinds of trumpets? I mean, I know that there's the trumpet and the cornet, which you can explain what the differences are, but within even that, are there different kinds of trumpets that you generally play? How many trumpets do you own?
I can't show it to you because I can't move the camera, but I have a whole wall of trumpets over here. I have 7 trumpets over here.
Wow.
And I could bring them all to you if you want to take the time, but I'll just describe them. There's the flugelhorn, which is a big, Chuck Mangione used to play the flugelhorn. There's the B flat trumpet, there's the C trumpet, there's the D trumpet, there's the F trumpet, there's the piccolo trumpet, there's the cornet, as you mentioned. There's all kinds of varieties, and we use them all for different musical styles and sounds.
Mm-hmm. And so when you say that there's the B flat, the C, the E flat trumpet, the piccolo trumpet, other than their size, which I assume is what makes the difference, the different key settings of these instruments, is there a difference in how you play them, in the mouthpiece you use on these different instruments?
Absolutely. I'll show you the 2 bigger extremes. Fantastic. So you have the flugelhorn, which is rather big. It's got a huge bell, and it's a rather big. And as you can imagine, it's got a really mellow sound. And then you have the opposite extreme, which is the piccolo trumpet, which is a very small bored trumpet, right? And so this is a cylindrical instrument, which means it basically stays the same size until you get to the bell where it flares out. And it's a very compact sound. And this gradually gets bigger all the way through until it gets to the bell. It's very mellow sounding.
Yeah, we're actually going to hear the flugelhorn in one of the selections that we'll be playing a little bit later on. So that's cool. And do you have a favorite? Is there a particular instrument that you like playing above all the others?
It's whatever is in my hand at the time.
Ah, good answer.
And that sounds like a very politically correct answer, but I really, one of the reasons I have these on my wall over here is so I can pick them up whenever I want and play them based on what I'm working on. And so many people have them in cases all the time, and you have to search through your cases and, oh, where's my D trumpet? Where's my E flat? I love to just walk over there and go, oh, I'm going to play the Hummel right now. I'm going to pick up the E flat trumpet, or I'm going to pick up the piccolo and play some Handel or some Torelli, or I'm going to pick up the flugelhorn and play whatever. And that's the beauty of having different trumpets, is you can have these different sounds at your command whenever you want.
And one last question on this line is, when you're practicing, do you need to practice all of the instruments to keep them up, or is it basically the same musculature that you're developing and the same technique?
If you have something coming up, you really need to practice them all. For instance, those of you that were at the Tony DiLorenzo concerto a couple of years ago, that included C trumpet, flugelhorn, a piccolo trumpet, and then a bunch of mutes. And so I definitely had to practice all of those things in order to make sure that I had my act together on all of them. I couldn't just like leave the piccolo trumpet till the end and go, oh, that'll be fine. I had to work on it.
Yeah, that was a great experience. I mean, for those of you who did not see it, you missed something really special. And not just the playing, but you actually put together a video presentation that went along with the concerto. Was that a first for you doing that?
Yeah, but once I heard the concerto, I knew it needed to be done. It was such a visual. It was such music that really needed to be told both orally and visually, that I really felt like it needed to be done. And thank you for letting me do that, because it was so fun to do.
It was a pleasure. And I know that Tony, who wrote the piece, loved the presentation as well. And it wasn't something that he had thought of. It really came from you. So that's a perfect.
It was a great experience.
Okay, so let's shift back now to your career. How did you come to Harrisburg? What brought you to this area to begin with from the Midwest? And what were the things that led you to play with our orchestra?
Right. So we moved from Chicago. My wife at the time got a job in the Marine Band as a clarinet player, and so that's how we moved to Chicago to DC. And I was trying to freelance and get my name around, and I met this guy named Tim White, who was just a freelancer at the time himself, and I heard he was a good player, so I don't know where I first played with him, but we played some church job together, and he says, oh, you have to come play in the Harrisburg Symphony. He was the Harrisburg Symphony principal trumpet player at the time, invited me to come play third trumpet and sub in, and this was years ago when Larry Newland was conductor, and I thought, wow, this is a really great orchestra. And the guy sitting first trumpet, Tim White, that I had met, I don't know, 2 weeks before, I was listening to him play going, wow, there's not too many trumpet players better than him. He's awesome. This guy is going to get a big gig. And sure enough, 2 years later, he got the principal trumpet in the Kennedy Center Opera House Orchestra. And so I found myself auditioning for his job since he relinquished it. And I almost got it.
You didn't get it at that point?
No, I came in runner-up to a guy named Andrew McCandless. Mm-hmm. So I played second trumpet to him for a year, and then, as luck would have it, he won an assistant principal job for San Francisco, and he left. And then they're like, okay, well, can you cover for a year? And I did. And then I covered for a couple of years, and then I finally auditioned and won the position outright.
That's fantastic. And it's been kind of, when I first came to town and heard the orchestra, I mean, the orchestra was fantastic, but what really jumped out at me was the quality of the brass playing. I mean, was it my imagination? It just seems like we've had a streak of amazing players in this brass section.
There's been a great tradition of great brass playing in this orchestra, and it kind of feeds on itself, too, because not only are the regulars fine players, but the people that want to come sub here want to come sub because it's such a good brass section. So it's a self-perpetuating situation.
Yeah, well, it's certainly my pleasure to have that be the case. It's always nice to, people say, so, what are the restrictions of what you can program? It's like, I literally can program anything I want because the orchestra can really play anything I would want them to play. And that's That's kind of nice.
And we like that. And you bring new things to us, like that symphony, that you brought to us in November,
The Weinberg.
the Weinberg. I'd never played that, and that was so cool.
Well, I guess spoiler alert, we're going to be doing some more Weinberg next year. So
Cool.
things like that. I mean, for me, it's such a joy because it's a discovery for me as well to find these pieces. I had never done that one either. And so in addition to this, when you moved to Washington, you started on another venture, which actually became something huge in and of itself, and that's the Washington Symphonic Brass. How did that come about? And I mean, talking about wearing many different hats, I mean, for a long time, it was kind of, maybe for the entire time, it was a one-man show in terms of arranging and personnel, artistic director and all that. How did that all happen?
Right. So almost immediately when I came to Washington, I started subbing with the National Symphony. And the principal trombone there was Milton Stevens. And he and I struck up a conversation. I said I'd just come from Chicago. And he said, have you ever played with the Millar Brass Ensemble? I said, yes, I used to be a regular member. And that was a large brass ensemble similar to the Washington Symphonic Brass. And there was nothing like that in the D.C. area. Mm-hmm. So we spoke about that, and we said, well, wouldn't it be nice? And I said, I'm right behind you. And he said, well, I'd like to conduct. And I was like, good, I don't want to conduct, I want to play. And so in 1993, we asked some of the best players in town to play a concert. We played the Tomasi Fanfare Liturgique and the Ratravera Requiem in Our Time and some other, and my arrangement on the town and some other things, and just did it for free at a church. And the response was huge. I mean, we had all the big brass files from the DC area come listen to us, and they immediately wanted another concert. And so we did 1, 2, 3 more concerts, and pretty soon people wanted to have us on their concert series, and they were paying us, and it kind of turned into this thing. We got our 501c3 and started getting donations, and it turned into this bigger thing than anything. And all along, I was having an outlet for my arrangements, which I was learning along the way, but I was, cranking them out.
Sure. How many arrangements did, just a ballpark, have you done at this point for brass ensemble?
If you walk into my basement, one of the reasons I have the house I have is because I could not find a house with a space large enough for my files of brass ensemble music. So I have an entire room full of brass ensemble arrangements that are mostly mine.
Incredible. That's really incredible. And is Washington Symphonic Brass still playing? Do you still do performances and recordings?
Yes, on February 4th, we're doing a concert to honor the late Leo Nestor, who was a composer in the D.C. area who died during COVID and never had a memorial. And he's a composer in his own right that wrote thousands of choral tunes, but also included the Washington Symphonic Brass in many of those at the Shrine of the Immaculate Conception, which was the big Catholic church in D.C. And so we're going to participate in this. And actually, I've arranged a couple of his tunes just for brass. So we're going to go back and do that concert February 4th, and hopefully more to come. I will say that we had our what we called post-COVID concert in June of last year, when we all thought we could just take the masks and chuck them away after the vaccine. Phase one. And so we had this really great concert. Actually, one of the best concerts we ever done was in June of last year, where we had a packed house and we played all this amazing music and dedicated a bunch of things to people who had died in COVID. And it was really emotionally fulfilling, but also emotionally uplifting. And it was, I think we're still relevant, is what my answer would be.
Yeah. Well, that's fantastic. I mean, I've seen you perform on a number of occasions, and I mean, I can't recommend it more highly. It's a riveting experience to hear that level of brass playing in close proximity, with the music that you choose to play. It's always it's a hoot and wonderful musical experience.
So for those of you who are having trouble picturing, this is a full orchestral brass ensemble: 4 trumpets, 4 trombones, 4 French horns, a tuba, and 3 percussion, with conductor, and it's an amazing sound.
Yeah, it really is, and you do have a roster of some of the best players I've ever seen. So that's exciting. So let's take a break now and hear another musical excerpt. This one is going to be the one with Beverly. Do you want to introduce the whole concept of it and introduce Beverly at the same time?
Sure. So my wife Beverly is an amazing flute player. She and I met in the Baltimore Symphony. She right before COVID spent 5 weeks playing with the New York Philharmonic. So she's very fine player. And during COVID, the first Easter of COVID, which I guess is the Easter of 2020, we were all sitting at home because that's what
That's
we
what we
had to
did.
do. And I had never since I was in junior high, I had not sat home in Easter. Like I'm like it's Easter. I'm supposed to be going playing at church somewhere. So I'm like, what are we gonna do? And so I said we're gonna go play. And so I said grab your flute. And we like this Bach piece, and so I grabbed a camera and a stand, and we grabbed our stuff and got the dog, and we went in about 15-minute hike from here. First of all, I live on a mountain next to a state forest. It's the Nasahikan State Forest. So we hiked to this place I call the Cathedral, which are these huge pine trees, and it's a really special place. And so we started playing just flugelhorn and flute, and the dog was there, and I had some different cameras there, and we played some Bach. And the cool thing about this is one of the world's best trumpet player, Alan Dean, is never on Facebook, but somehow he found this video and he called me and he said, "That's some of the coolest stuff. I just love Bach," and it's just, I mean, it got some good publicity, but it's a special piece because it gave me something to do that was special on Easter.
Well, I know that everyone will enjoy it. Let's give it a listen. Well, that was beautiful. Made more beautiful that it's you and your wife. I always love the idea of families making music together, and in a beautiful place. Needless to say, I mean, the area of Connecticut you live in is spectacular, and you chose a good time of year to do it as well. So what I'd like to talk about now is the one aspect of your career that we haven't discussed, which is education. You're a great performer, a great arranger, a great composer, but a lot of your time is spent teaching younger trumpets. And so talk a little bit about that and how you came to your present position and how you're enjoying that whole vibe.
Well, I always tell people you're never going to escape teaching if you're a good player, because if you're a good player, people are going to come seek you out and want to study with you. So whether you have a position in a university or you're just in the New York Philharmonic, you're going to be a teacher. So you better figure out how to do it. And I learned early on I liked it, and it was inspiring. And so when I was in Baltimore, I taught at Peabody, but I was always adjunct. I taught at Towson and George Mason and Peabody, and I would do what I called drive-by lessons, where I would drive like a crazy man to get there from a gig, and I would, screech in, and I'd go to the studio, and I'd be like, okay, what's your name and what are we working on? Right? And now, so what I always wanted to do was build something like Barb and Charlie had when I was at Eastman, which is they would really take ownership of the studio, kind of mentor these young musicians, young professionals along, and really set them up in a way, both playing wise and career wise, that they need. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm no longer in the Baltimore D.C. area. I live in Connecticut, and I teach at the University of Hartford at a place called the Hart School, which is music, theater, and dance. And I'm associate professor, but I just went up for tenure in full, and knock on wood, it looks good. I just got
congratulations. I'm trusting it will happen.
I just got a letter from the provost saying that the only thing that needs to happen is that the Board of Regents needs to sign off for it. So fingers crossed. But that means that I can basically teach well into my 80s until they have to just shoot me. And it's great because, my playing career has a finite, time to it, but teaching, I think you can always impart information. And I like being around students because they inspire me. They're always so optimistic, and they're hopeful.
Yeah. And do you find that there's been any shift with the shift in our profession since COVID? Is there a shift in terms of the number of students who are interested in making careers in music, or has it basically stayed steady?
No, the great thing about young people is they're thankfully oblivious of practicality. So they want to, if they want to play the trumpet, they're going to play the trumpet. They're not going to. You ever watch the Kaminsky Effect?
I loved it.
Yeah. So remember that scene where he talks, he says, basically trashes the acting industry and says, you guys don't want to do this, and they all still want to do it. That's my students.
Well, listen, so that guarantees the future of our art form, right? As long as there are students crazy enough to go into this profession.
That's exactly right. Because they're not practical people, and we weren't either when we were young. And that's cool. They're just optimistic and hopeful and idealistic. And when you get to a certain age, you don't want to just hang out with people your age. You want to hang out with those people, the people that are hopeful and optimistic and have that vibe. And I find that keeps me young.
It's true. So in addition to playing trumpet, have you changed your approach to teaching to include other things? I mean, you talked earlier about talking to an audience, and do you teach things like that to your students as well?
Absolutely. That's one of the reasons people come study with me, because I've traversed this career. I didn't just go win principal trumpet in New York Philharmonic. I mean, with all due respect to Chris Martin, that's almost the easy way out, because if you get a big gig like that, and basically everything's done for you, the programming is done for you, the publicity is done for you, the ticket sales is done for you, the everything, you just show up and play, right? You have to play really well, but you just show up and play. But what I've done is done so, created so many things. I call it making rain. I've made a lot of rain. And so when you make your own rain, it's not only more challenging, but it's more fun. But I can teach other people how to make rain. And that's what I do. So not only do I teach them how to play well, but I teach them how to make rain.
I think it's a wonderful approach, and actually, I think it's as important for young musicians these days to have these associated skills as it is to be a great player, because most of them are not going to get the big job in the New York Philharmonic. And so
There's only one Chris Martin.
That is true. So being up in Connecticut, one of the other nice things I know for your career is that you've had an opportunity now to play in the Boston area with the Boston Symphony, with the Boston Pops. Talk a little bit about that. I mean, that's kind of first of all, it's one of the great orchestras of the world, so it must be a fabulous experience to play with them. How is it like breaking into a new market and playing with players that you've never played with before?
Well, completely unexpected. First of all, I'm of the age where people don't bang my door down to I'm not the next hot thing, but somehow I found myself in a situation where I actually did go play for an extra audition. They were having some people come play at Symphony Hall, and they said, "Do you want to come play?" I was like, "Yeah, sure." And I kind of knew the second trumpet, Ben Wright, and he said, "Yeah, come play." And so I did, and for a year and a half, I heard nothing. So it was great. I just thought I played, and they hated me, and that was it. And then a year and a half later, I got called for a Boston Symphony Pops holiday concert. And I was like, wow, they must be really far down the list. So I went and played, and then ever since, it's been I've been playing a lot. And even during COVID, they had me film with them Shostakovich 1 and the Hinnemouth Music for Brass and Strings. I mean, there were a lot of people that probably should have been called for that weren't. I got the call. I find myself very fortunate. I'm going to Europe with them in May on a full out tour to Paris and London and all these places. So I don't know why they're using me, Stuart. My time is limited, but I haven't pissed anybody off yet, so it's been fun.
That's fantastic. Congratulations. And
thank you. And it's in a world class. So the hall is really part of that orchestra, right? You have the world class hall of Boston Symphony Hall, which when you play a note on that stage, you think, wow, I am the greatest player that has ever lived. And it's a lot, the hall.
You know, for all that one can say about the beauty of the Forum, it does often strike me like, God, what would this orchestra sound like in Boston Symphony Hall or in Severance Hall or one of these great world-class concert halls? But we probably will never know.
So our next interview should be with Matt Herron saying, when is our tour to Boston?
Exactly. I will bring that up. Good. So let's this is actually a perfect segue into the final musical selection, because obviously playing with the Boston Pops, you're playing a wide variety of musical styles. And this next one is in a very different musical style than the previous two. Do you want to introduce this very interesting and an amazing excerpt?
All right. So Mike Nickens is the director of the Green Machine at George Mason University, where I used to teach. And he's not only a fine tuba player, but he is a very versatile personality, and he has probably more hits on YouTube than you and I will ever have. And he put out this series called Tubas and Turntables during COVID, and he invited different people to collaborate. And so this same track, you're going to hear him play tuba on, and do kind of a little turntable funky thing on. Was collaborated on by a lot of different artists. They did their thing and to the same track. And so I watched this all go on, and I was like, I could never do that. That's not my thing. And then I kind of got mad at myself. I was like, yeah, you can do something. And so of course I had to write it all down. A lot of people just kind of did their own thing kind of spontaneously, but I wrote the whole arrangement for multiple trumpets and put it with his track. And of course he loved it. But I sat in the sideline for a long time. And so what I always tell my students is, if you sit on the sideline long enough and think long enough about it, you need to jump in at some point. And that's what I did.
Yeah, well, this one I absolutely adore. You're in for a treat. So enjoy this wonderful collaboration of Phil with a lot of other Phils.
How low can you go? How low can you go? How low can you go?
So what a gas that is. That's just an amazing piece of music. Congratulations on putting that together.
Thanks. It was a lot
And
of
to
fun.
Mike, of course, for the whole concept. I think it's actually really clever, and it encourages me to look at the other things that came out of this project, because it must be pretty cool.
Well, we all talk about diversity and diversifying yourself, really, and I thought I need to collaborate with this because it improves me, and it really that's what it's all about, connecting with people, even if you're not comfortable in their genre.
Yeah. Well, you did great. I thought it was wonderful. So let's talk a little bit about Harrisburg Symphony, because I like getting the perspective of the players that I interviewed for the series. What is it that you think makes the Harrisburg Symphony special? I've heard you speak very eloquently about it in the past. And what are the things that you think are unique about this particular regional orchestra?
Well, I think one of your favorite lines was that it was about like letting people out of jail and having them just rush in and do whatever they need to do with reckless abandon and passion. And that's kind of what this orchestra is like, because we do so many different things. I'm a college professor now, and a lot of people, some people are in the military band, a lot of people are freelancers, they play weddings, they play different things, but then we get to come to Harrisburg and see our friends and play orchestral music, and we like each other, and we like you, and we like, under normal circumstances, we like playing in the Forum, and so we have fun, and unlike orchestras that have to be there for 52 weeks, I shouldn't say have to be there, are there for 52 weeks, and do this every week. We don't do it every week. We do it once a month. And so for once a month, we come together and play music that we love, and with our friends that we don't see every week, which is another big thing, because if you're in the Philadelphia Orchestra, you might like the person sitting next to you, but you might not. But you can't change that. So if you don't like the person sitting next to you in the Harrisburg Symphony, and by the way, we do, but
Yeah.
we usually, in other words, it's only once a month. And so we usually take care of these relationships in a way that's very healthy, and we all have our disagreements, but then we all come together and usually make up, and it's a special time for us.
Well, it goes for me as well, and I like to say also that it's nice being the conductor that people only see once every 4 weeks, because there's no time to get bored of Melina on the podium. So finally, these are obviously very special and very difficult times that we're in right now. How do you see our profession, that this world of orchestral music, emerging from the pandemic? Do you see it as a smooth return? Do you think it's going to be very bumpy? What do you see as the prospects for our art form going forward?
Well, I wish I had a crystal ball. I'm a very hopeful person. I tell students in master classes that I ask them what they know about the pandemic of 1918, and then I ask them what they know about the Roaring '20s. And I said, after 1918, after they finally got out of this damn pandemic, there was the Roaring Twenties, which they went crazy because they needed to express themselves. They needed to be with other people. They needed to, I think we have a very creative time ahead of us, hopefully. And of course, then some, smart aleck will raise their hand and go, does that mean we're in for the Great Depression of 2032? And I'm like, okay, I deserve that. But my hope is that because we've been locked down so long, because we've been having to do the masking and all this stuff, that once we finally get out of that there's going to be a real thirst for going back to live performances. We've already seen that. The concert I did in June with the Washington Symphonic Brass, you could not have fit another soul in that auditorium. They want to come hear you. They want to see music live. They don't want any more Zoom or virtual concerts. They want the real thing. Yeah. So that's good.
Well, I pray that what you say is right. I actually am an optimist as well, and I think that will emerge very well. But it's a little scary to think about the possibilities, because every time we think we're past it, something happens. So hopefully we are finally past canceling concerts, and that we'll be together again in a few weeks to play some great music.
Well, one of my favorite pieces is Prokofiev 5, so thank you for programming it, and thank you in advance for not canceling it.
It is one of my favorite pieces too, and it'll have to be pretty darn dire for me to cancel that one. But Phil, thank you so much for joining me today. Please send my best to Beverly, and very much look forward to having you back in Harrisburg soon.
Thank you. My best to your family as well.
You got it. Take care.
Thank you, Phil, for joining us for that wonderful interview. I hope you've all enjoyed watching our discussion as well as his wonderful musical interludes. This is a terrific month for us. We've got two fantastic concerts in the month of February. On the 12th and 13th, we have our Masterworks concert. We open with a brand new fanfare by Valerie Coleman. This will be followed by internationally acclaimed pianist Stephen Huff performing Saint-Saëns' romantic Piano Concerto No. 4 with the orchestra. And then the second half of our program is one of my favorite 20th century symphonies, Prokofiev's Fifth Symphony, which takes you on a vast journey of excitement, lyricism, and incredible dramatic power. A couple of weeks later, on the 26th and 27th of February, we'll be having our next Pops concert. This is Back to the 80s, where we'll be playing great hits from the 1980s. This was my period of time. It should be a fantastic concert with singers and songs that everyone will know and love. Please join us at the Scottish Rite Auditorium for these wonderful concerts, and I look forward to seeing you there. For now, thank you again for watching, and see you next month.